So my next topic, we will look at these different, if we think about an art project, it does include this kind of like an artist, it includes the manager, or mediator, whatever word you want to use, and then it includes some kind of target group, and all kind of aim, you have here some kind of joint aim. This is not, my example is not especially an art project where you should try to change the world through the means of art, but rather a project for artists. The aim for this project was to include marginal artists in the Finnish art field. And the target groups were disabled and immigrant artists. And they did different things. They aimed at giving guidance, changing the attitudes of the potential employers, of the authorities of the art field, and they did different activities. I will go into those a bit more detail. And it had eight partners, and we, Anne, that someone knows, and me, we made a study. And we interviewed 20 artists, and then we interviewed the people engaged in the project, and then kind of followed some of the meetings as well. And it had different types of organizations that were involved. And what they did mainly was this kind of training, seminars, lectures. They had experts, and the first very practical problem came from there, that they didn't actually think about the target group. Okay, they thought that it's immigrant, we might need to speak English, but they never, for example, thought that some of the disabled artists were blind people. And once they didn't inform the lecturers, so when the lecturer comes, they have the PowerPoints. And you have the blind people in the audience. So what do you do then? So you have to really, the small things I think Christina was mentioning, that they do matter, because they can kind of create the whole failure in that space. So they were learning by doing. They kind of realized, okay, this is a bit different target group that we're organizing these lectures, and we have to kind of rethink about that. They had these TV shows, which was kind of using artistic ways in a way to influence the general audience and also the authorities. And then they made the home pages. And here again they had lots of challenges, because the artists had very different skills in providing information about them, providing materials, doing the web pages, and what can you put in a web page of each of them. And then they had exhibitions, they made books. And then we kind of made the interviews at this stage. And what we kind of came up with was the criticism from the part of the artists that the organizations, the people, were not exactly the right people, because they were not from the inside of the art field. They were not from the record companies, they were not from the publishing companies, they were not from the galleries. So how can they open up the doors if they themselves don't have open doors for there? So you should reflect on how can you actually kind of engage that. But once again, this was a good project in that sense, that it was able to kind of turn around and change its activities. So they had felt that, for example, that the gallery field is very closed, but once they kind of got this criticism, they went and talked with the galleries and actually got a series of exhibitions from this group presented in the major galleries in Helsinki. So they kind of realized that they need to do some things, that they were not part of the community, but they could maybe still open up the doors. Then they had a lot of like this, talking, lecturing, but the artists were complaining that, it's too much when you get a lecture about how to make an application for a scholarship, that you don't really understand it. So they started changing their practices as well, and having more this kind of hands-on helping and doing it together and commenting their applications, and kind of starting to think, how can you actually do it together? And many of these artists felt that they would actually learn a lot from the other participants. And they had very little time in their program for this like social interaction. That many of the, let's say, immigrant artists already had experiences of the Finnish system and could kind of relate it to the experiences of the newcomers and help them. So they once again made a turn and changed their way and created this kind of clubs. And they also started these new groups, smaller groups based on different art media, for example, publishing, music and so forth, where they engaged one artist to run the team. And they created concrete products like make a book and made a concert, made a CD and things like that, series of exhibitions. So they actually kind of were reactive to these ways. So they were, but they were very good in that they actually had thought of kind of using different types of media. They had the web pages, they had reports, they had events, they had the exhibition space, they had the net pages and so forth. So, and they were good, I think, in that they were able to kind of change the plans. And in many ways it was this kind of like a way at the beginning that they seemed, that the managers, when they were interviewed, they saw the artists as like objects, as targets, that I'm, helping them, and not saw them as like active participants, having also a lot of knowledge and competencies that could contribute to the success of the whole aim, the whole process. And they did this kind of not think of this learning and building up the competencies and entering to this art field as creating a new identities for the artist, as being professional artists. Many of these were kind of in between of being professional, non-professional artists, and how they kind of help them to kind of become new and become artists, professional artists in Finland, in that way as bringing these new identities. And that they also kind of started to reflect. So what they did employ kind of producers, people that could actually help face to face and kind of engage in this identity building as well. The club, and also in other events, they organized more free time and more social events so that the artists could learn from each other and kind of create networks in between themselves as well. And then they also kind of invited these art field experts, and also, for example, like the gallery thing, that they did open up some of the doors for these artists, and then created these outcomes. So it was really like the practical learning, how then to do the book, how to do an exhibition, how to get the audiences in very, very hands-on way. So I think this is a good example in that they were able to modify their actions, and they were also able to rethink about their own role in the project based on this analysis. It was not only our study that made the change, but they also got lots of feedback from the artists that this is what we want. And then what we looked at in this paper, I can put the article to the edutizer later, was that what is that you have to have different types of activities in order to kind of learn different types of knowledge and different types of practices. And then you have to kind of think very carefully about the role of we call them mediators, but the project managers. What should they be doing, and what kind of roles could they take, and how should you treat the target group? And once again, talk with the next door person, or maybe the person across the table if you can hear, and discuss what could be the role of the target group, and in your cases, how well is the target group taken into consideration? Is it active participant, or is it just an object that we're kind of pouring things to? There was an example from our Japanese colleague who's not here, and they have a case in with the elderly ladies whose homes were destroyed in Sendai area with whatever the waves. And they are very trained in traditionally not to talk with anybody, like strangers. And then they brought in an artist from theatre side, from UK, to kind of interact with them and start building kind of like their self-esteem and finding out how could they help them to build up their lives again. And it took a while, but then this artist found out that they had one joint language, and that was needlework. So by starting doing needlework with these elderly ladies, this UK artist, actor, or theatre director, I don't remember which one, they started to get into communication and building up the understanding of what actually was that they wanted to do as a project, and how could they kind of engage in joint activity. So it can be very various ways of interacting with the target group. So keep this in mind when you reflect your cases, that what is the target group, and does it have different types of layers, and how then to tackle this kind of a participation and involving the target group, and where are the limits, because of course we can't modify everything to the wishes of the target group either. We just might not have the resources or the skills, or the wishes of the target group might differ so much that we just can't do everything, but we have to kind of keep in mind their perspective and involve them and understand their needs, but also kind of understand our own aims and resources and what can we do and what are the limits that we can do.